Imagine an engine that was created for war, not for automobiles, a huge device that would propel tanks across hostile combat zones. Imagine the same engine tearing up a drag track, displacing hot rods and muscle cars. Doesn't it sound crazy? However, when gearheads transformed a tank engine into one of the most outrageous drag racing machines ever seen, this is precisely what occurred. The amazing tale of the tank engine that dominated drag strips is examined in this video today. The tank engine's origins. During World War II, military engineers needed unrestrained power, which is when the narrative starts. In order to move thousands of pounds of steel through mud, sand, and snow, tanks needed engines. The Continental AV-1790 AV-12 gasoline engine with well over 700 horsepower was one of the most renowned designs. Some tanks were also equipped with V-12 diesels or monster radial aviation engines, which were designed to withstand extreme circumstances. These engines prioritized torque, dependability, and physical power above speed. However, many of these engines were either dismantled or left unused after the war. They were too hefty, too thirsty, and too impractical for most people. However, these engines seem to be an unexplored power source for drag racers and hot rodders. What might a tank engine achieve in a lightweight drag vehicle if it could move 60 tons of armored steel? How the outrageous idea began. Drag racing was at the height of its popularity in the 1950s and 1960s. Jet engines, A-plane engines, and anything else that might provide incredible horsepower were all being experimented with by racers. Tank engines were thereafter acquired by a few crazy builders. One of the most well-known was the tank engine, the Chrysler V12 AV-1790. Although it wasn't designed for vehicles and weighed close to 2,500 pounds, ambitious racers nonetheless tried. In comparison to the 400 to 500 cubic inch V8s that dominated drag strips at the time, these engines had an enormous displacement of nearly 1,790 cubic inches. The concept was straightforward. Disassemble a tank engine, adjust its RPM, and install it in a drag vehicle. It was more important to startle the audience than it was to move quickly, and the earth trembled and heads fell as those tank-powered creatures sprang to life. First tank-powered dragsters. Art Offens, a racer from Ohio, constructed the Green Monster, one of the first and most renowned examples. Known for pushing the envelope, Offens shocked the racing community in the 1950s by powering his dragsters with World War II aircraft engines and then tank engines. The audience was in disbelief at what they saw. Tank engines provided a different type of power than the thundering roars of normal dragsters as they roared down the strip. People assumed the dragster was a hybrid of an automobile and a military machine because of its deep, guttural roar and rapid acceleration. These were speedy machines, not only showpieces. Tank engines transformed lightweight drag vehicles into rockets with horsepower numbers that, when adjusted, could easily surpass 1,500 to 2,000 horsepower. Other racers experimented with tank V12s and even modified Allison V1710 aviation engines, so the Green Monster wasn't alone. Fans couldn't get enough of them despite their danger, unpredictability, and sometimes instability. Officially, the tank engine had become a legend in drag racing. The power of tank engines. You must understand why tank engines were so overbuilt in order to appreciate the hoopla. Tank engines had a single purpose: to propel large armored vehicles in any situation, unlike automobile engines, which strike a compromise between efficiency and performance. Huge displacement. With cylinders huge enough to accommodate your arm, these engines put out enormous torque at low RPMs. Built for abuse, engines for tanks had to be able to operate for hours in freezing snow, mud, and sandstorms. Crazy torque. When thrown into a 2,000-pound drag vehicle, the torque transformed into blazing acceleration, making it ideal for transporting 60-ton tanks. Simple yet tough. Many were radial engines or naturally aspirated V12s that could operate on subpar gasoline. Mechanics removed extra weight, improved fuel distribution, and sometimes incorporated false induction after the vehicle was adjusted for racing. The outcome? Suddenly, engines built for combat took control of speed. Tank engine difficulties. Tank engines, as crazy as they were, presented enormous difficulties. Weight. The engine itself often weighed more than the drag car chassis as a whole, weighing 2,500 pounds or more. Handling became quite challenging as a result. Tank engines have a capacity to consume gallons of gasoline per minute. They consumed racing gasoline like water on the strip, which made them unusable for anything other than show runs. Mechanics detested working on complex systems. The majority of drag strips weren't set up for such massive engines. Parts were difficult to come by, and tuning was unpredictable. Safety risks. Controlling traction was almost difficult due to the high torque. Drivetrains broke, tires tore, and sometimes vehicles swerved dangerously off course. Racers enjoyed the show in spite of these problems. It was more important to put on a show, push the boundaries of engineering, and demonstrate that even an engine designed for combat could rule a sport that relies heavily on speed than it was to simply win. Drag strip legacy. Tank-powered dragsters started to become less common by the late 1960s and early 1970s. Later, new technologies such as jet-powered dragsters, nitromethane fuel, and supercharged V8 Hemis took control. They were simpler to tune, lighter, and more effective. However, the tank engine's legacy endured. There was nothing like seeing a 12-cylinder tank engine thunder down the quarter mile for the people who were there. It was about unadulterated, wild spectacle, not records. Tank engines are still restored by select enthusiasts for special displays and motor events. When one fires up, it's like traveling back in time to a time when racers were prepared to risk everything for the most outrageous creations. Tank engines were, in many respects, the pinnacle of hot rod culture, transforming something commonplace, or, in this instance, exceptional, into something wild. The cult status and myth. In today's automotive culture, tank-powered dragsters are considered legendary. They stand for an era when being innovative meant having no fear. Because of their audacious efforts, builders such as Art Orphans and others became folk heroes. These devices are considered mythological by contemporary admirers. They stand for defiance of tradition, where creativity was unrestrained and norms were irrelevant. Drag racing is heavily controlled now, but in the past, anything that could move quickly was allowed. Additionally, tanks are a cultural symbol of power, devastation, and conflict. It made a strong statement and captivated the attention of fans worldwide to take something designed for combat and let loose on a drag strip. Videos of surviving tank-powered vehicles continue to receive millions of views on the internet, and collectors and historians continue to honor these engines. Both the quickness and the bravery required to construct them captivate people. Even though it no longer dominates the strip, gearheads still hold the tank engine in high regard. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe for more.